Welcome to the House of the Author's summary of HBO's House of the Dragon, second episode. Unlike most summaries of George R.R. Martin's work, this recap is exclusively for writers to learn from the master writers involved in the series. Sorry this episode has been so late, but I got behind while I was on vacation. I'll be working extra hard this week to catch up. The first thing I noticed that had changed in this episode is the opening. Instead of seeing a game board with various houses popping up in 3D, we see blood welling up in dials and flowing over King Viserys' model of Valeria. Several people have analyzed this opening, and the upshot is that the dials represent various Targaryens. Blood floods the dials that represent Targaryens who are already dead, and a crown represents those who have ruled Westeros. In other words, this opening represents the Targaryen bloodline. If you want to know more, here are two links to people who did a great job explaining the details. The second episode is bookended with scenes of the crab feeder. The crab feeder's appearance is reminiscent of Game of Thrones' major villain. The crab feeder begins and ends the episode in tension by crucifying men on the beach and letting crabs consume them alive. It also introduces conflict with the realm, and especially Corlys, who is the master of ships and whose people make a living from the sea. The stakes are worse than life and death. They are death by long, painful torture, which really ups the stakes and thus the tension. We're not told much about the crab feeder, but we can deduce what sort of person he is from his chosen method of execution. Also, it appears that he has a significant skin condition. The skin condition reminds me of grayscale. We've run into that malady before in Game of Thrones, where it seems to be an allegory for leprosy. The end stages of grayscale lead to violent insanity. Is that why the crab feeder is so violent? What little we see of the crab feeder tends to make us even more curious about him. The final scene acts to compel us to watch the next episode to find out more about this antagonist. Likewise for Ser Cole. We find out little scraps of information about him. He's Dornish. He is the son of a steward. Normally, knighthood would be out of reach for such an ordinary human, but he was advanced to knight for his performance during actual battle. Otto and Sir Harold Westerling disapprove of Sir Criston Cole because he is the son of a steward of the Lord of Blackhaven. He is not officially royal. Otto wants a more political appointment to the King's Guard, but the princess cleverly points out that Sir Cole is the only battle-tested knight available. Rhaenyra wants Cole to be the new King's Guard because she admired his beauty at the tourney. In this long time of peace, most of the knights have no combat experience. She discovered he was on the front at Dorne at the tourney, so she uses his life combat experience as an excuse to choose him. All of that just whets our appetite to know more and draw us deeper into the story. As with most episodes of Game of Thrones, the question of a woman's place in society comes up. In this episode, we see women treated like sexual pawns. King Viserys is asked to marry a 12-year-old. The 12-year-old is comically forced by her father to give a speech about her breeding potential. Meanwhile, Otto pushes his 15-year-old daughter to seduce the king, and Otto is clearly pleased when this plot succeeds. Rhaenys tells Rhaenyra the order of things. We talked about camera angle and positioning of the actors to make Rhaenys appear superior to most of the other characters. In this episode, Rhaenys appears seated when she speaks to Rhaenyra, and she is on the same level with a flat camera angle when offering her daughter in marriage to Viserys. The message is clear. The only people Rhaenyra has to submit to are the royal family. They are the only ones she has left to conquer. With great power comes great responsibility. This episode brings us closer to King Viserys. There is no doubt that Rhaenyra is the protagonist, but similar to Game of Thrones, Viserys seems like a first-season stand-in protagonist. The difference is that no one will be surprised when King Viserys dies. In this episode, he's shown as vulnerable. He did indeed love his wife, Aemma, and has not had time to mourn her death properly. Yet, he has to take a new bride due to the political environment and the risks his realm faces. It is the last thing he wants to do, but he is not free to refuse. His goal is to rule the realm wisely, but also to do right and keep his daughter close. In order to rule wisely, he needs to self-sacrifice and remarry, which might alienate his daughter. As we watch him struggle with this dilemma, we feel closer to him because he is trying to do the right thing, and we can empathize with being caught in such an impossible dilemma. He is tortured by this decision and gets counsel from everyone he trusts. His body language and dialogue indicate he wants to do no harm to the women in his life. Unlike most Game of Thrones monarchs, he's actually a likable guy. He represents duty, love, and family. Daemon, on the other hand, shows what an irresponsible leader would look like. Daemon is impetuous, disdains his wife, and is hurtful to her, does not care what is right for the realm, only what is right for him. His relationship with Rhaenyra is not as straightforward as the one she has with her father. Daemon's impetuous, antagonistic behavior makes Viserys look even more cautious and rational. And that is the job of a foil. A foil has the opposite traits of one of your main characters. When shown in alternating scenes, the foil's reverse traits make the main character's traits seem even more prominent. In a way, Rhaenys plays the foil of Rhaenyra. Passed over twice for the Iron Throne, Rhaenys has accepted her society's subjugation of women, while Rhaenyra is determined to change women's status in her society. Corlys and Otto are clearly at odds in the small chamber. Corlys has to sit furthest away from the king and has to shout to be heard, not really a problem for him. Otto, on the other hand, sits alone at the right hand of the king. So close, he can just whisper to the king. That makes Corlys feel like an outsider already, so we aren't surprised when he allies himself with Daemon. Otto and Corlys are actually seeking the same goal, pushing their young daughters on the king in order to raise their own station. Corlys prefers the honest approach. He simply says what's on his mind. While the king is unwed and without a male heir, the realm is in danger. Then he enumerates all the reasons his daughter is the best option. He makes his daughter memorize a very stiff speech about herself as breeding stock, something no child would say without parental coaching. Corlys' full frontal military-style attack scares the king away. But Otto is a skilled statesman, and he employs enthymeme, a debate tactic where the premise is not explicitly stated. He has groomed his daughter to be a subtle manipulator as well. They use the king's emotions and loneliness to set Alicent up as the next queen. In this set of foils, Corlys represents the conscious mind, while Otto represents the subconscious mind. And in a contest between these two, the subconscious mind always wins. Game of Thrones generally demands the top echelon of acting ability. For writers trying to learn the craft, great acting can help you portray body language accurately. Subtle body language in acting, as well as literature, allows the audience or the reader to deduce the character's feelings about a situation on their own. So much more satisfying than being told the emotion the character is feeling. I think this is so important to creating vibrant writing. I actually made a writing exercise that I try to do once a month. You can see my exercise in a link below this video. This episode has some particularly good body language. In a rather comic scene, Viserys is offered the hand of the 12-year-old Lady Laena and compelled to take a walk with her. Clearly, both are uncomfortable talking marriage. They walk in silence, snatching sideways glimpses of each other. Viserys sighs heavily. Luckily, Laena's been coached by her parents, and she starts talking history and dragons. And it works! Viserys loosens up a little, but he sighs several more times at Laena's naive questions. When Laena gives a speech about her pure Valyrian blood and bearing him many heirs, Viserys' face looks shocked, and then he turns on the parental concern and asks what her mother told her. The question catches Laena off guard. Her parents haven't covered this possibility. She considers, sliding her eyes to the left and down, and then tells the truth. Rhaenys told her she would not need to bed Viserys until age 14. For Viserys, that's the last straw. He glances down and then away from her while flashing a quick grimace. He's horrified, and he just can't wed this child. I love to see a gifted actor or actress rely on their body language and face to convey a message instead of relying on dialogue. Silence in a scene really ups the tension. Like when Rhaenyra oversteps her bounds in the small council and suggests sending dragon riders to the free cities. In response, she is given the task of choosing a new king's guard. Later, she bemoans being seen as a child and her contributions being dismissed. Now, look at her face in the moment her suggestion is disregarded and she is sent out of the council chamber. Put this video on pause and try to describe her face. Can you use your description in your own writing when you need to convey disappointment? During the tense conflict on the bridge at Dragonstone, we see Daemon out of focus while Myseria's face is in sharp focus. Daemon claims Mysaria is pregnant and they are to be wed. News to her, apparently. Notice her frown, how close her eyebrows are, and where her eyes are pointing. How would you describe that in a fresh and interesting way? When Daemon approaches her in private after the incident, she isn't having it. She gives him the cold shoulder. How would you describe her body language now? In the final scene, Viserys has made his decision. He steels himself for his announcement to the small council. He faces away from them, takes deep breaths, and looks down as he prepares himself. When he turns around to face the council, talking about remarrying is obviously difficult. His daughter gives him an encouraging smile. But he isn't looking at her. She follows his eyes, and realization hits her. On her face is writ the betrayal she feels. She realizes in that moment, when she felt so close to Alicent in the Sept, when she confided in Alicent, that wasn't friendship, it was manipulation. She is realizing she really does exist alone. This is the face of betrayal and being utterly alone in the world. How would you describe it? Note how her eyebrows creep up, her cheeks seem to droop, and the corners of her lips drop. Her whole face seems to sag. There's a lot of light, airy scenes this time. Only the Sept and the bridge on the way to Dragonstone have a darker mood. The Sept is somber. The bridge is about conflict and potential death. It also sets up dueling seats of power, Dragonstone versus King's Landing. Viserys is always pictured in the setting sun through this episode, foreshadowing the end of his reign. Various carved figures represent people in House of the Dragon. The stone balls of the small council, the miniature statues for the knights. The writers are telling you everyone in the story is a piece on a game board. While talking to Alicent about the glory of old Valyria, Viserys breaks a small figurine of a dragon. Several times people have noted that the Targaryens are just ordinary people without their dragons. We know that Viserys used to ride a dragon, but now he seems to feel dragons don't belong in the world. Does this broken figurine foreshadow the disappearance of dragons under Viserys' watch? This Game of Thrones prequel, like the original Game of Thrones, seems to revolve around a certain dagger that got passed around the Starks and was used to finally end the threat of the Night King. Apparently, before this dagger was in the possession of the Lannisters and then the Starks, it began its life as an heirloom of the Targaryens and rarely left the king's hip. Despite its long, pointy handle, King Viserys generally ignores the knife, except when Alicent is in the room. Then, for some reason, the dagger always needs readjusting. Obviously, Game of Thrones has never shied away from being very open about sex. They have no problem with male or female full frontal nudity, or even portraying sex that is taboo in our culture. So why so prissy about Viserys and his desire for Alicent? Well, I think it is so they can negotiate the demands of the final plot twist in this episode. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But now seems like a good time to discuss Freudian symbolism in literature. To some extent, all of our creative efforts are the product of our conscious or unconscious minds. Any narrative that involves images, even images that are only in the reader's head, or any endeavor related to human psychology, can be interpreted using the psychoanalytic tools Sigmund Freud developed. We call this type of analysis psychoanalytic literary criticism. When using psychoanalytic literary criticism to analyze literature and movies, focus on Freud's major theories. One of Freud's most radical insights was the notion that human beings are motivated by unconscious desires, fears, needs, and conflicts. The unconscious mind is the storehouse of those painful experiences and emotions, wounds, fears, guilty desires, and unresolved conflicts we don't want to deal with. The subconscious mind develops at a very early age through repression. Our unhappy memories are periodically cleaned from the conscious mind and stored in the subconscious mind, where they influence our behavior in ways that are unconscious to us. When we're asleep, the subconscious mind talks to the conscious mind in a language of images. In dream displacement, we use a safe person, event, or object as a stand-in to represent a more threatening person, event, or object. For example, dreaming about a child almost always reveals something about our feelings towards ourselves, toward the child that is still deep within and is still wounded in some way. Literary works are similar to viewing the dreams of the author. Recurrent or striking images reveal the ways in which the narrator or author is projecting his unconscious desires, fears, wounds, or unresolved conflicts onto the characters. Look for symbols relevant to sexuality, yonic and phallic symbols. Freud believed all children must successfully pass through the Oedipal-Electra phase to develop a normal moral adult sensibility. In the Oedipus complex, a boy, ages 3 to 6 years, competes with his father for his mother's attention until he abandons his desire for his mother out of fear of castration by his father. In the Electra complex, a young girl competes with her mother for the affection of her father. Freud observed an alarming degree of self-destructive behavior. He theorized that humans have a biological death drive. Our fear of death is closely linked to our fear of intimacy, abandonment, and being alone. Freud divided the psyche into 3 entities: the ego, the superego, and the id. The id represents our desires, instincts, and libido. The id is devoted to gratifying all our forbidden desires: sex, power, amusement, food, etc. The superego represents the rules and taboos we've internalized from our culture. Society's rules and definitions concerning sexuality form a large part of our superego. We are socially programmed to feel guilty when we break a social value. As the id drives our behavior using pleasure, the superego puts limits on our behavior using guilt. Ego is the product of the conflict we feel between what we desire and what society tells us we cannot have. The ego mediates between the id and the superego and chooses our actual behavior. That's a whole lot to take in. So I've created a psychoanalytic literary criticism worksheet, which you can link to below this video. A phallic symbol is rarely about an actual penis or even about sex. The symbol is often in the shape of a penis, but anything thinner than it is long can be used as a symbol for male genitalia and, by association, a character's masculinity. Common items used as phallic symbols are a knife, a sword, lightsabers, gun, pencil, tools, chainsaw, drill, gas pump nozzle, instruments, a stethoscope, various monuments and statuaries, a finger, or a magic wand. I could psychoanalyze Harry Potter for you, but it would ruin this delightfully innocent book for you forever, so I won't. Notice that most of these items can be used to create or kill or fuel something. The power to create or kill is a significant power. That gives you a clue to the real purpose of a phallic symbol. It represents power. Phallic symbols were originally important to culture as symbols of potency, of the capacity to cause germination. Germination of a human child, of a calf, of a lamb, or even a field of wheat. By extension, the phallics became a symbol of power, and particularly of masculine power, and very often in an aggressive sort of way. When a character's masculinity is really out of control, it is frequently represented by a snake. A dragon is a giant fire-breathing snake. When you see a phallic symbol in literature, Start thinking about power. Who has control of this phallus? Who will kill or create or penetrate? If you see no such source of power, as Freud said, it may be because sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Most people know about phallic symbols, but few have been introduced to the female equivalent, the yonic symbol. The yonic symbol is so rare in conversation that Spellcheck doesn't even recognize it as a word. A yonic symbol represents femininity and reproductive power, particularly through objects vaguely reminiscent of a vagina or a vulva. Common items used as yonic symbols include cups, cauldrons, chalices, goblets, pots, and other containers, well springs, fountains, caves, tunnels, hand symbols, circles, and flowers, blossoms, and peaches. The yoni is the origin of life and is therefore fundamentally connected to birth and rebirth. Out of control, female power is sometimes symbolized by a demonized yonic symbol known as a vagina dentata, or toothed vagina. This vision of the goddess as a Medusa and a monster is representative of male-dominated cultures where female power is viewed as a threat, not because it is, but because it is a power which men lack. Speculative fiction is no stranger to this demonized symbol of femininity. Frank Herbert's Dune has a prominent desert predator known as the sandworm that the local matriarchal society worships. Notice that a dragon could function as a demonic version of either the phallic symbol or the yonic symbol. In Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader slays the evil emperor. But that isn't the end of the franchise. A knight can't merely slay the dragon to achieve lasting victory. A lasting victory can only be achieved when the hero and the heroine work together to overcome, not slay, the dragon with the greatest power of all, love. Just as in mythology, denial or violation of feminine power in modern fantasy often results in a fatal wound. When Vader kills the Emperor, he does so alone, not with Padme, the physical representation of his female power. You cannot cheat death by violating life. The ability of man to know, not take or usurp the true power of a woman is how he too can wield the power of life and know oneness with it. In Attack of the Clones, the Geonosis execution arena abounds with yonic symbolism. The word Geonosis is a play on the word Genesis, which means origin, source, and beginning. The yoni is the source from which life originates. But on Geonosis, Count Dooku and Viceroy Gunray and others stand directly before the metaphorical source of life with the goal of murder. Padme, Anakin, and Obi-Wan are chained to giant phallic pillars. Metaphorically, Padme is chained to the patriarchy and she is ready to fight for her freedom. Throughout the fight, Viceroy Gunray provides chauvinistic and sexist commentary dictating what women can and can't do. In the battle, however, Padme breaks free and scales the pillar to which she has been chained. Enslaved women breaking free of their chains is a recurring theme in Star Wars. Leia, Padme, and Rey have each broken their chains. Padme stands atop the pillar dressed in white. In both a literal and moral sense, she has the high ground. The Jedi will be forced to sacrifice their morals in the Clone Wars in a fight for control against the Separatists. Padme, however, is a symbol of purity and compassion. She holds the power that Anakin sought all along. It is Padme who tells Anakin that all she wants is his love. It is Anakin who insists that love cannot save her, that only his newfound powers can save her. When Padme breaks free of her chains and begins to whip the vagina dentata monster, Viceroy Gunray exclaims, "She can't do that!" The subtext being, women can't do that. Gunray then exclaims, "Shoot her!" or something. Phallic symbols, such as guns, swords, and lightsabers, are traditionally used to convey male dominance by taking life away. They empower men by showing their ability to gain dominion over the feminine power of giving life. Gunray is surrounded by Yanis, and he is trying to prove that his guns are bigger. The Jedi sink into the Clone Wars when the answer to defeating darkness literally surrounds them in the Yonic symbols of the arena. Victory can never be achieved by taking life. It can only be found when women and men embrace life. When men and women work together with love on their side, nothing can stop them. Our heroes will achieve lasting victory not by violating and dominating life or love, but by working in symbolic oneness with love, referred to as the Force in Star Wars. Early on in Return of the Jedi, the heroes are sent to face the all-powerful Sarlacc by Jabba the Hutt, a snake-like, well, more like slug-like, phallic symbol. "You will, therefore, be taken to the Dune Sea and cast into the pit of Carkoon, the nesting place of the all-powerful Sarlacc. You will be slowly digested in his belly, finding a new definition of pain and suffering." Rather than give birth to new life, the Sarlacc devours it. Jabba the Hutt is gluttonous and cruel, and seeks to enslave women for his own selfish pleasures. Ironically, when he sends the heroes to be devoured in the jaws of the Sarlacc, it is Princess Leia who devours him. She strangles Jabba with the chains he used to enslave her. As Luke stands over the Sarlacc pit, the image is a powerful metaphor of the choice that he must make. Metaphorically, Luke can choose to be devoured by the dark side as his father was, or he can reject the dark side in favor of selfless love. Luke's refusal to fall into the pit, both when he stands over the Sarlacc and when he faces the Emperor later on, enables him to pull his father out of the pit of the dark side. Luke refuses to commit patricide at the order of the Emperor. Luke succeeds because he realizes that he does not need to use external power. He only needs to find the selfless love within him and be vulnerable enough to trust in it. He reaches his father Anakin by extending compassion to him. It was fear of losing possessive love that caused Anakin's fall to the dark side, and it is compassionate love that returned him to the light. Anakin had to descend into hell and be reborn in Return of the Jedi to learn the truth. The real power, as it turns out, is found in women. Luke is able to wield the power that allows Anakin to be reborn. Like a woman, Luke brings forth new life. Luke assimilates the feminine not through a show of male bravado and lightsaber prowess, but by drawing from his own capacity to feel selfless love. True power and strength is found within, which is what the symbol of the Yoni really represents. Denial of the female power in Attack of the Clones attempts to destroy life, while acceptance of feminine power in Return of the Jedi restores it. Heroes need to accept and not fight against the principles of feminine power. Leia tells Luke in Return of the Jedi, "You have a power that I don't understand and could never have." To which Luke responds, "You're wrong, Leia. You have that power too." This statement holds true for women and men alike. Each is powerful and each can know the power of the other if they only allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to admit it and courageous enough to show it. How can a man know the selfless love that a woman experiences in childbirth? By working in harmony, not discord, with all life, and by treating it with the reverence and respect it deserves. Feminine power is the power of life itself. It is both love and strength. So what does all this psychoanalysis have to do with Game of Thrones? Consider that the most snake-like of the dragons is Daemon's Caraxes, and Daemon's masculinity does seem to be out of control. He even steals a symbol of feminine power, a dragon's egg. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra is called the Princess of Cups, a Ionic symbol. She retrieves the egg without shedding blood. She is the controlled female equivalent to Daemon's uncontrolled masculine power. Are we to see a Star Wars showdown between Rhaenyra and her uncle? Will Rhaenyra show mercy, or will a male ally show mercy and compassion to achieve a lasting peace? It seems unlikely, as we already know that the Targaryens do not achieve lasting peace in Westeros. George R.R. Martin is a master of the plot twist, so I was very interested to investigate the ending twist in this episode and see how it was set up. The best endings and plot twists are surprising, but when the reader pauses to consider, they appear inevitable in retrospect. How did House of the Dragon achieve that feeling with this matrimonial twist? Viserys is confronted with the need to remarry. He has three options. Ignore the advice of the small council, marry Laena, or marry someone else. The writers take great care to steer our expectations toward a union between King Viserys and Lady Laena. We see Rhaenys and Corlys offer her to Viserys. Then we see Viserys and Laena take a very uncomfortable walk together. Then Viserys frets about marrying Laena to everyone he is close to. He never frets about Alicent. His time with Alicent is very platonic. He never mentions marriage to her or even touches her. He doesn't even look aroused or interested in her. This focus on Laena and downplaying Alicent makes it feel like he is only considering two of his options. Therefore, we are surprised when he announces his marriage to Alicent, but in retrospect, the decision seems obvious. So I think that's why we ended up with the phallic dagger. In a plot twist, you're going to have that surprising yet inevitable feeling. We got the surprising aspect of the plot twist largely by ignoring Alicent in this episode. But if we leave it that way, the reader or the audience will see it as cheating, like a deus ex machina. Viserys just does something inexplicable that the author wants. That would not elicit the retrospective feeling of inevitability. To get that inevitable feeling only when the event occurs, you have to hint at its possibility in a gentle, indirect, subconscious way. So it doesn't hit the forefront of the conscious mind until you want it to. A symbol is perfect for that sort of hinting. It stays just below the consciousness until the details of the event are considered. Even then, we might not understand why we think so, but we feel it was obvious Viserys was aroused by Alicent all along, and choosing her over Laena makes sense. Unlike Freud, Jung saw the unconscious as not just one system, but two. The personal unconscious, which is similar to how Freud saw the unconscious, contains forgotten information as well as memories that have been repressed. The second layer is the collective unconscious. In Jung's theory, this is the unconscious that is shared by all people, including the latent memories of our ancestors. This collective unconscious creates a virtual image of the world through evolution and ancestry, creating an imprint that is shared by all humans through the collective experience of everyone. This collective unconscious also creates archetypes. Archetypes are universal and universally recognized and appear in culture all over the world as various, easy-to-recognize symbols. These archetypes influence behavior in the present and the future. Wounds that won't heal are a common trope in fantasy. In the Jungian system, they usually happen for spiritual or highly symbolic reasons. They can also be received as a result of treachery, cowardice, or malice, enough to force the injured person to pay for their trespass indefinitely. Perhaps the wound can indicate that the individual is cursed, or the wound may be made by something powerful enough to prevent healing, such as Frodo's wound from the ring wraith. Either way, normal medical care simply won't do the job. Somehow, the wound must be purified and the symbolic meaning behind the injury rectified before the sufferer stands any chance of being healed. The really unfortunate can never be healed and spend the rest of their lives in pain. Unhealable physical wounds often transform into psychological wounds, shaping the course of a character that suffers from them. In episode 1, we see Viserys being treated for a wound that will not heal on his back. He says the wound is from the Iron Throne. By the end of episode 1, the throne has cut him again. This episode, we see that that wound isn't healing either. Viserys' non-healing wounds have some unusual connections. Note that the episode opened with the crab feeder crucifying his victims. One of the first scenes of Viserys is the Maesters treating the cut he received last episode with maggots. Both of these scenes involve a wound to the hand that will not heal. In the first case, crabs are eating the victim. In the second case, maggots are eating the patient. Are the writers trying to connect Viserys to the crab feeder somehow? Or are the writers hinting that Viserys did something in the past that he can't forgive himself for? Or perhaps the writers are foreshadowing that Viserys is being poisoned. Notice both wounds are on his left, the side that Daemon sits in on the small council. When Daemon sits the throne, he leans to the right. Has he poisoned the throne? Or like Frodo, is Viserys being injured by something so powerful that the wound can't heal? Viserys' wounds are from the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne is a symbol of ultimate power in this series, but it is also black, so it's tied to death. The Iron Throne is eating King Viserys a bite at a time, causing him to rot from the inside out. What does that tell us about the symbol of power and the quest for power in general? Or perhaps the never-healing wound is evidence of a curse. Viserys wears the dagger that has been so important in Game of Thrones, the one used to try and kill Bran, and eventually used to kill the Night King. Is that dagger cursed? Or, like the opening indicates, is this a blood curse? Is something in the Targaryen line particularly disruptive to a leader's spirit? Viserys seems to question if humans should have created dragons. Now that dragons are here, are they a curse? Is the exploitation of something so powerful as a dragon by his ancestor a curse upon his blood? King Viserys is building his reign on the foundation of old Valyria. The model of Valyria is in the background of many of the scenes, especially those with Viserys. It's like the tragedy of old Valyria is always hanging over the king's head. The stories the king tells about old Valyria overstepping the boundaries of the world with blood magic and with dragons make it sound as though the city fell because it was too powerful, or perhaps it was struck down like Sodom and Gomorrah. Did the black magic and tampering with things that should remain beyond human control curse all the descendants of Valyria? The Targaryens came to Dragonstone due to a dream, and thus they avoided destruction when Valyria falls. The series is obsessed with dreams. Is that what Viserys is cursed with? The assumption that Targaryens are the heroes of their own prophetic dreams? The idea that only a Targaryen can prevent a tragedy? It seems so when he tells Rhaenyra a Targaryen must sit on the throne when the Night King comes. But we know a Lannister sits on the throne at that moment. Or is the idea of Targaryen blood being better somehow, more worthy of the throne, a curse? The possibility of so many answers to this question compels us forward in the story to see what hidden thematic message this season of the series is really all about. All right, that was quite a long episode. Let's sum all of this up. We learned to dole out information in small bits, so the reader or audience will be compelled to stick with the story to find out more. At intervals, like the beginning and end of this episode, remind the reader of something they don't know or conflict that is coming to keep them compelled to move forward. We talked about how foils can be used to make some character traits more prominent in the reader's eye. We talked at length about examining actors at the pinnacle of their craft to enhance our own skills in body language. I even gave you an exercise you can do on some of the interesting scenes in this or other episodes. And I emphasize that silent action by a character can make a scene more tense than any dialogue if the body language is played right. We discussed props as symbols used for foreshadowing. And then we embarked on a rather long discussion of the place of symbols in human psychology and in literature. We talked about the views of both Freud and Jung on symbols. We discussed psychoanalytic literary criticism, and I provided you with a worksheet to help you analyze other works of literature. Then we ran through a psychoanalysis of the feminine in Star Wars. We looked at how to use this knowledge of symbols to create a surprising but inevitable plot twist. We spent a great deal of time considering what King Viserys' unhealable wound signified and how all those options compelled us forward. And we also learned to offer up more than one possible developing theme, and the reader will stick with you to the end to see which theme you reveal at the climax. If you want to be informed about the next Game of Thrones analysis I produce, or you would just like to get my newsletter full of writing tips, go to my website and sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of the page. And thank you for watching.